This is question 17 from section 1 of the 2014 BMAT, and in this question we're asked to find the flaw in the argument. So let's just remind ourselves, if we're looking for a flaw, that's often a possibility the writer's missed, or a causal assumption, or an overgeneralization. So let's have a look at this argument and see if any of those apply. So in the first couple of sentences, the writer says that STEM careers are becoming increasingly dominant, so more common, but also many people are warning us that we need to train more STEM workers. So this is just a fact about what careers are common and what certain people are saying. And then at the start of the next sentence they say there's an alternative to STEM training. So if they think there's a viable alternative, that's going to be their opinion. And they try to back that up in the same sentence. They say anecdotal evidence. So that's evidence that's based on some people's personal experiences. That shows that the best STEM workers are the ones who are the best at thinking and communicating. So although anecdotal evidence isn't particularly good evidence, it is still a kind of evidence, and the writer's using this as a fact. In the next sentence they say we should focus on producing people with agile minds instead of producing scientists or engineers. So they're saying what we should focus on, that's going to be their opinion. And lastly they say that being able to analyse and communicate information is the most important skill for the future. So this is a prediction about what skills are going to be useful in the future, so that's also going to be an opinion. And now we need to find a conclusion, because we're looking for the flaw in the way the conclusion was drawn. So we've got these three opinion type statements, but out of these, 4 is basically expanding on 3a. So this says there's an alternative and this spells it out. And then between, so that would mean if either of these was the conclusion, it would be 4. And then between 4 and 5, it looks like 5 is a reason for 4, because this is giving a benefit to having an agile mind, and then the conclusion is to train people with agile minds. So it looks like 4 is the conclusion, and what's basically the reasoning behind this conclusion? Well, it's this reason and also this reason that the best STEM workers have agile minds anyway. So because they mentioned agile minds just after mentioning thinking and communicating, I'm basically taking that and analysing and communicating information, which is the same thing, as being what the writer means by agile mind. Otherwise it just isn't defined anywhere. So they're saying that the best STEM workers have agile minds, and agile minds will be important in the future, so we should train people with agile minds. But it's worth noting here, if they just said we should produce workers with agile minds, it probably wouldn't be a flawed argument. That sounds like a reasonable argument based on what they've said. But they specifically say we should produce people with agile minds instead of producing scientists or engineers. So that makes their conclusion a lot stronger. It's not just what we should do, it's what we shouldn't do as well. So whatever the flaw is, it's likely to be connected to this instead of. So let's have a look at the options and see if any of them would basically undermine this instead of part. So first let's look at A. A says the writer assumes that you can't be trained to have an agile mind. Could that be the flaw in the argument? Well, actually it seems like they're saying exactly the opposite of that. They're saying we should train people to have agile minds. So they seem to be thinking you can be trained to have an agile mind, so this can't be the flaw, it's just the opposite of what they're saying. If we look at B, B says the writer ignores the increasing popularity of STEM courses. Could this be a flaw in the argument? Well, it doesn't really seem relevant, because what's the writer arguing for is what we should do. So what people currently are doing, which is even if that's training for STEM, isn't really relevant, and none of their reasons are about the popularity of particular courses, so this is unlikely to be a relevant flaw. C says the argument doesn't use other countries for comparison. Does that seem like a flaw in the argument? Well, again, it doesn't really seem relevant. So suppose their reasons are just true for the country they're from, well, that would still give them reason to train people with agile minds. So suppose an agile mind will be an important skill in the future in their country, that's still a good enough reason for their that part of their conclusion to train people with agile minds. So C just doesn't seem relevant. Then let's look at D. D says the argument assumes an agile mind is just as effective if you don't have STEM training. So does this seem like it might be a relevant flaw? Well, now this does sound a bit like it might be relevant to what we were pointing out before, that they're suggesting replacing STEM training, not just, for instance, adding to it. Since this flaw has the form of an assumption, what we can do is do the not test to see if this is actually something they're assuming. So suppose the opposite of this. Suppose that having an agile mind might not be as effective if you don't have STEM training. Well, they did just give evidence about the usefulness of agile minds in STEM workers. They haven't said anything about workers who don't have STEM training. And if having an agile mind isn't as effective if you don't have STEM training, it doesn't make sense to replace STEM training with training to have an agile mind. You would need to do both. So it's the rather than or instead of that's the problem again. So actually it does seem like if we assume the opposite, that breaks the argument. So this is an assumption they're making. And also it's not one they support with any evidence, so that would make it a flaw. So it looks like this is the answer. Let's just check E. E says the writer ignores the opinions of STEM employers. Well, this kind of option where it basically says the writer should have used some other piece of evidence is rarely the flaw. Because what we're really concerned with is whether the evidence they do give actually leads to their conclusion. And whether or not E is true doesn't affect whether the reasons they give leads to their conclusion. So STEM employers aren't really relevant to the reasons they give, and so E is just irrelevant to their argument, and so again we see D as the answer.